They saw her as nothing more than a plain woman in worn-out clothes, quiet, kind, and always keeping to herself. In the eyes of the wealthy elite, she was invisible. At charity galas, high-end shops, and fancy restaurants, people rolled their eyes, whispered behind her back, and treated her like she didn't belong. But what they didn't know was that she was hiding something big. You see, beneath her simple smile and second-hand coat was a secret that could shake the entire room. An unimaginable $750 million fortune. Not inherited, not handed over, she earned it, every single penny. Yet she never let the money change her. She still rode the bus, still helped neighbors carry groceries, and still lived in the same small home she'd had for years. But when one lavish event goes too far, when a rich couple mocks her in front of a crowd and security is called to escort her out, that's when the tables begin to turn. What happens next stuns everyone in the room and flips their entire world upside down. This isn't just a story about wealth, it's about judgment. It's about how the richest in the room can be the poorest in character, and how the quietest soul can hold the greatest power. So, who is this mysterious woman? How did she build a fortune that would make even billionaires take notice? And what did she do when the truth finally came out? You won't believe how this story unfolds, especially when the people who once looked down on her suddenly start begging to be in her circle. Stay with us, because what happens next will leave you speechless. Her name was Clara Reynolds. Most people in town barely noticed her. She worked part-time at a small bookstore, lived in a modest cottage at the edge of the city, and spent her weekends volunteering at the local animal shelter. Nothing about her shouted money or status. In fact, most assumed she was just getting by. But Clara never corrected them. She just smiled politely, nodded, and went about her day. What no one knew was that 10 years ago, Clara made a decision that would quietly change her life forever. After inheriting a small amount from her late grandmother, barely enough to buy a used car, Clara didn't spend it. Instead, she invested it in a small tech startup that most people hadn't even heard of. Everyone told her she was crazy. But Clara had done her research, believed in the founder's vision, and trusted her gut. The startup grew, fast, and before long, Clara's modest investment began to multiply. She didn't cash out, she waited. Year after year, her fortune quietly grew behind the scenes, until one day, her shares were worth over $750 million. Still, Clara chose to live simply. She didn't want attention. She didn't want to prove anything. But that didn't stop others from assuming the worst. At one luxury fashion event, she showed up in a plain dress and flats. The room went silent. A few women laughed behind her back. One man even asked if she was lost. That night, something shifted. Clara had kept her secret for years, but being humiliated in public sparked something inside her. Not revenge, clarity. And what she chose to do next would leave every single person in that room questioning everything they thought they knew about her. Because Clara wasn't done surprising them yet. Clara didn't react right away. She didn't storm out or raise her voice. She simply stood there, letting the awkward laughter and whispers wash over her. But behind her calm eyes, she was making a decision. That night, while the others clinked champagne glasses and gossiped about fashion trends, Clara walked out quietly and made a single phone call to her lawyer. The next morning, invitations went out, not from some event planner, not through word of mouth. This time, it was a personal message from Clara herself. A private gathering held at a historic mansion on the outskirts of town. No one knew she owned it, because she'd bought it through a trust years ago. The same people who had laughed at her were now puzzled, curious, and suddenly very interested. Meanwhile, rumors started to swirl. Who was this woman really? How could someone who shopped at thrift stores and lived like a regular person afford a mansion with antique chandeliers and artwork worth millions? One of the event organizers from the fashion night tried to dig into Clara's past but found nothing. No social media, No flashy headlines, just a paper trail that ended in silence. Back at the bookstore, Clara's co-workers noticed she'd taken a sudden leave. She hadn't said why. Some thought she'd been embarrassed. Others wondered if she was dealing with something personal. But a few started to ask questions, quietly. Had anyone ever really known her? And then there was Elena, the fashion influencer who had first made fun of Clara. She received an invite too, and her curiosity got the better of her. But when she stepped into that mansion a week later, everything she thought she understood about class, power, and wealth began to unravel. Clara's secret wasn't just money, it was something deeper. As guests began arriving at the grand estate, the air was thick with confusion and quiet nerves. Expensive cars lined the driveway, their owners stepping out in tailored suits and designer dresses, unsure of what to expect. The same people who had mocked Clara days before were now showing up with cautious smiles and curious eyes. They still didn't fully understand who she was, but they knew enough to realize she wasn't just some woman. Inside, the mansion was nothing short of breathtaking. Marble floors, gold-trimmed walls, and a staircase that seemed to belong in a palace. Soft classical music played in the background, and staff served drinks with quiet precision. No one saw Clara, at least not at first. Her name wasn't mentioned. Her face didn't appear on any photos. But her presence was everywhere, in every detail, every corner. Elena, the influencer, wandered from room to room, growing more uneasy with each step. She recognized several pieces of art hanging on the walls, rare, original, and worth millions. She tried to laugh it off, saying the host must be some mysterious collector. But deep down she knew. This wasn't some stranger's home. This was Clara's world, a world they had never bothered to see. Then came the moment that shifted the energy in the room. The main doors slowly opened and Clara walked in, not in heels or jewels, but in the same calm, modest way she always had. No security, no announcement, just Clara. But this time, the room went silent not out of mockery, but out of shock. Phones were lowered, conversations stopped mid-sentence, and all eyes turned to the woman they had once dismissed. She walked to the center of the room, paused and looked around. And then, with one quiet sentence, she began to reveal the truth. Clara stood tall in the center of the room, her voice calm but firm. "You all think you know what wealth looks like," she said, eyes scanning the crowd. "But real wealth isn't about what you wear or where you dine. It's about what you do when no one's watching." The room remained silent, stunned by her composure. But just as the guests began to grasp what was happening, Clara dropped a second surprise, one no one saw coming. She reached into her small leather bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "Inside this," she said, "are the names of 5 people in this room. People who, without knowing it, have already been part of something much bigger than they realize." Whispers broke out. Eyes darted from face to face. The tension snapped into something sharper: fear, curiosity, panic. Clara didn't open the envelope. She simply placed it on a nearby table and said, "Each of you will find out soon enough." Then she turned away, leaving the room in stunned silence. What no one knew was that Clara had spent the last year not just managing her fortune, but quietly investing in lives. Funding businesses under different names, paying off debts without being known, offering second chances, but only to those who had once shown kindness without expecting anything in return. Now, some of those very people stood in the room, unaware of the role they'd played in her journey, and the ones who had looked down on her. They were about to find out how quickly things could shift. But the biggest shock wasn't even the money. It was what Clara planned to do with it. And as the night continued, it became clear. This wasn't just a quiet woman with a fortune. This was a storm, calmly brewing. As the evening drew on, the room remained charged with tension. Guests whispered in tight circles, casting nervous glances at the envelope Clara had left on the table. Some debated whether to open it, while others stood frozen, unsure if their names were inside. Clara, meanwhile, moved through the room with quiet grace, speaking only to a few. The same people who once overlooked her now clung to every glance, every word. Then came the moment that changed everything. Clara gently tapped her glass, and the room fell still once again. "Many of you wondered why you were invited tonight," she said. "It wasn't to shame anyone. It was to show what's possible when we look past surface judgments." Her voice softened. "I used to think staying invisible protected me. But silence only lets the wrong voices get louder." She walked to the envelope, opened it slowly, and began reading the names. Each one she called belonged to someone who, years ago, had shown her a small act of kindness: a warm coat on a cold day, a ride home in the rain, a meal shared without questions. Those 5 would each receive a multi-million-dollar investment in their dreams. Gasps echoed through the hall. Some cried. Others stood in stunned silence. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Clara turned to the crowd. "As for the rest of my fortune," she said, "I've already given most of it away." She paused. "To causes that protect people like me, the quiet, overlooked, underestimated." Elena stepped forward, her voice trembling. "But why?" Clara met her eyes. "Because power isn't in keeping wealth. It's in knowing when to let it go." And with that, Clara left the room, quietly, just as she'd entered, leaving behind a story no one would ever forget. After Clara left the mansion that night, the mood among the guests shifted from awe to quiet reflection. For the first time, many of them had to face what they had ignored for years: their assumptions, their judgments, and the ways they measured worth. The woman they once mocked had changed their lives without lifting her voice, without flaunting her wealth, and without asking for anything in return. In the days that followed, stories began to spread. The bookstore where Clara worked announced it had been anonymously bought and turned into a community hub, offering free books, tutoring, and job training. The animal shelter where she volunteered received a donation large enough to expand its services and never worry about closing again. The 5 people whose names she called, each of them used their investments to launch something meaningful: a bakery, a health clinic, a scholarship fund. Clara didn't just give them money, she gave them a chance. Elena posted a video days later, not to rebuild her image, but to admit her mistake. "I judged someone by her clothes, by her silence," she said. "But now I realize I've never met anyone more powerful." Clara was never seen in public again. She didn't return to the spotlight or claim credit. But her impact lingered in every corner of the city. People talked about her in cafes and classrooms, not as a millionaire, but as a reminder that kindness, humility, and quiet strength can outshine any luxury brand or social status. And so the simple woman everyone once looked down on became the one they remembered most. Not because she was rich, but because she showed the world what true wealth really looks like. And that is the story they never saw coming.